When she left the store, she was just a woman. Her second trimester belly delicately rests on groceries in one hand, and car keys in the other. Circling under a worn sweatshirt, there was silence in the skies. The receipt was still warm. Her purse. It ought to have been the kind of day that fades into obscurity, into the haze of running errands and listening to soothing radio music. For Angela Morris, however, it would be the day that the country would silently observe the fact that her skin tone was considered probable cause. The cost of misidentification. Get on the ground, they said. She claimed to be expecting a child. They repeated it to her. She questioned why, and the pavement kissed her cheek before her breath could complete the phrase. Her physique, under the weight of 2 uniforms that hadn't asked her name, the same one with a child, was pinned and smashed. They didn't inquire about the contents of the bag. The receipt was not examined. Their mental algorithm operated too quickly. Just the hoodie is questionable. Someone shouted, somebody recorded, someone shed a tear. However, nothing prevented the subsequent events. She didn't yell, shed and fight. Through clenched teeth and growing panic, she merely whispered, "Give my spouse a call, please." Among them, one sneered. "He practices law." The cop laughed, without raising his gaze. She attempted to elaborate. "However, he is the director." Prevented her from finishing, because that didn't matter in their universe. In the parking lot? No. Not in an area where safety had always been a conditional fantasy around the globe. They believed they were aware that she was just another issue to counteract. And they attempted to do just that until the phone rang to make a call they were unaware of, and they never paused to consider that it wasn't just any husband who answered that missed call. He was the recently appointed FBI director, individual whose responsibility it was to look into such misbehavior. A man whose there will be no silence after that night. However, privilege is not the subject of this tale. Assumption is at play here. It concerns what occurs when power is lost and authority is exercised without responsibility. Patience, as well as when someone's identity isn't even acknowledged before their dignity is disregarded. Reminding people that viral sensationalism does not create moments. They originate from injustice that was documented in real time. It's not fiction. This isn't a legal drama or a popular show. Podcast about true crime. This is America. Now is the time. Additionally, here is the tale of how one man's principled restraint, one woman's quiet strength, and one act of prejudice too reckless to hide sparked we can no longer postpone the match to a reckoning. When Angela Morris awoke that morning, she looked like before the sun rose, before the children woke up, before her husband's second alarm on any other weekday. She filled a cup of cold coffee before she had even had a chance to sip it, packed 2 school lunches, and bid her kids farewell with a kiss. Running in the direction of the bus stop. Nothing particularly noteworthy was in the air, nothing that suggested her name might be popular by sunset on social media. Her thoughts as she drove to the shop were somewhere else. Lessons, pediatric consultations, and the soft flutters in Herbally, reminding her that she was starting afresh as a mother. What did she wear? She consistently wore yoga pants, comfy shoes, and a gray hoodie with the school mascot on the rear. No cosmetics or jewelry. She had no intention of making assertion. All she wanted was to get through the day. She navigated the aisles of the grocery store like a performed a ritual. Prenatal vitamins, almond milk, nappies, and wipes. She made a payment, full, gave the cashier a kind nod, and proceeded to her vehicle. Behind her, a store employee paused. There was something off about Angela's look. Perhaps it was the hoodie. Perhaps the bag appeared overstuffed. Perhaps it was simply the way before reason has an opportunity to react. Unconscious prejudice may whisper into action. Consequently, a call was placed. A woman who vaguely fit the description and may have been stealing from a store made her way to the parking area. Officers Blake and Keene accepted the dispatch without question. The black woman was visible to them, alone next to a silver Honda Civic. She unlocked the rear door and put her belongings inside. No yelling, no just goods, and a silent sigh, a hurried movement. However, this was the call detailed suspicious conduct. They stepped out more forcefully and pulled in quickly. Their voices were forceful, clipped and cutting, but their guns remained holstered. "Madam, please stop and sit on the curb," Angela said, looking up in surprise. "Is with the receipt still in her fingers," she said. "Is something wrong?" "Just act as you're told," yelled one of them. The other took a step towards it. Confused but calm, Angela stated that she favored standing and was pregnant. "I'm not fighting. I simply don't get it, why they're stopping me." The words were measured and quiet, just like black women instructed to speak during situations like these, when deference might turn into disobedience and tone can be interpreted as threatening. Second, however, her tone was not heard by the officers. All they noticed was her posture. Additionally, when after a brief moment of hesitation, Keene initiated contact. Her shoulder was touched, a shove, a turn, the world shifted for Angela. Before she could, the ground struck her. She braced herself. She scraped concrete with her elbow. The fetus kicked her. A onlooker let forth a gasp. Someone other raised a phone. She took no action. Someone shouted. Angela's voice cracked as Blake reached for cuffs. "I'm expecting a child. I'm refusing to resist. Stop, please." However, she was not being heard by the authorities. They were hearing their own training, their own anxieties, and their own haste. Additionally, those anxieties had been calibrated over many years by suspicion was fueled by media and subconscious bias. They didn't. Rather, Officer Blake the other sneered, "If he's so important, why isn't he here?" Another victim playing one. "I saw her pay," said a close customer once more. Nothing was taken by her. However, this was no longer a theft issue. Actually, it was never. It had to do with authority, confinement, and dominance-based de-escalation. And it became terrifying for Angela. It was obvious that they were only interested in conclusions and not in inquiries. Although she had lived long enough to understand what that did, she was not unaware that her husband was the director of the FBI and failed to shield her. Early in their marriage, David had forewarned her. She used to believe he was being rude when he said, "Don't ever assume they'll know who you are. They'll only see what they want to see." Too cautious. She realized now that he was being realistic. As she placed her cheek against the discolored asphalt. David was walking around FBI headquarters. His midday call was never missed by Angela. He overlooked it when she didn't respond the first time. He called again the second time. He sent a message by the third. Text. No response. She was not like that. He sensed it in his stomach. Something wasn't correct. An old woman returned to the scene and stood up, supporting her phone with hands that are shaking. "This is incorrect," she stated, displaying a video. Clip to a just-arrived police sergeant. The video was brief yet unambiguous. "Baby formula is being purchased by Angela. The cashier was thanked by Angela. Angela is on her way to her vehicle." The sergeant, his face stiffened as he silently inspected it. "Who called this in?" he inquired. The response arrived. "She appeared suspicious, according to the store manager. Has anyone checked the theft?" "Not yet, sir." The sergeant approached the pair of officers. "Grab her. Up right now." They paused. "In response to her resistance, sir," I answered, "get her up." Angela flinched as they lifted her. There was swelling in her right wrist. She had scratches on her face. However, what went more deeply was the awareness that none had paid attention. Not until it was indisputable. Not till silence and pixels were used to deliver the evidence. By now, David had located Angela's finality grocery shop, a known location utilizing shared device data. He dialed the shop. Supervisor. No response. He made a precinct call. No unambiguous records. Lastly, someone from headquarters came up to him, clearly shaken. "There was an incident, sir? A woman of color was arrested, outside a shop. She fits Mrs. Morris's description, but her ID is unverified." Hadn't yell. He remained calm. "Where is she now?" he said simply before leaving the room. Angela was seated near the rear of the She declined the water supplied by the patrol car, which was now uncuffed. An alternative officer, a younger, more circumspect woman, softly inquired, "Is there someone we should call?" "For you?" Angela gave a nod. She paused, then said, "My husband?" "David Morris. He's the FBI director." The youthful cop blinked. "I apologize. What were you saying?" Angela said it again, unequivocally. The officer struggled for her phone as she left. After looking at the name, the sergeant next to her went pale, insolently cursed beneath his breath. Because the story changed in that moment. There was a name for the suspect, a narrative, a relationship that required responsibility. However, what they were unaware of, the fact that David wasn't coming for retribution was unexpected. He was seeking clarification. Not to safeguard authority, but to reveal that it does not exist. Because his wife, Angela, was no exception. Too. Many Americans lived by her rule, which stated that being black in public could be greeted with force before words and distrust. Consequently, when David showed up, not with cameras with a countenance etched in silent rage rather than a news crew, he did not talk first. He glanced at the scratches on his wife's arms and at the cops. After the video was shown to him without any commentary, he finally stated, "We'll deal with this appropriately, internally, legally, openly." Angela leaned against him to be seen, not to pass out. Additionally, that day, for the first time, someone really did. Angela was stopped for driving too slowly when she was here previously. In the suburbs, then shopkeepers who grinned suspiciously, but never in this way. This was not like the others. As her heart slowed, not accelerated, as the cops drew in, she heard their tone was sharp and their body language conveyed their confidence. Her training began. Remain composed. Not suddenly, no protest-sounding questions, no movements. She hardly raised her voice above a whisper. "I'm pregnant," she said. "Haven't taken any action," but she was yelling inside. The bag in her hand was not examined, a receipt was not requested. Not even the cart was checked. They observed posture, attire, and skin tone. A bias algorithm they dubbed suspicion. Officer Blake looked away and sneered at her in the eyes. "Never assume that you are any different from other people." The words came out like ice slap. The others, the unseen category into which black individuals are consistently assigned fare, the facts become clear. Slowly, Angela grabbed her phone, her fingers shaking from years of rehearsed dread, not from guilt. "I must," she said, "call my husband." However, a boot descended as soon as David's name appeared on the screen. The gadget broke up against the concrete. In a single motion, her lifeline was severed. "That's resisting," Officer Keene stated. "Now we have a problem." A child's voice broke the tension from the other side of the pavement. The little white girl pulled at Mom. "Why are they hitting that lady?" She pointed to her mother's sleeve, remained silent. She was unable to. She froze. From embarrassment, not danger, the sort that rages more intensely than fear. Officer Blake now yelled more, loudly, requiring control as the level of concentration increased. "You are defying legal orders," he yelled, half to Angela, half to the cameras that are suddenly coming out of phones nearby. "If you do not comply, you will be charged." They scraped Angela's knees. Her hands, the attempt to brace the fall caused bleeding. She was unable to react quickly enough. Not by their standards. Her eyes grew wide. Not from discomfort, but from a more serious fracture. Her tears weren't for herself. She knew the rules, which is why she was sobbing. She followed everyone. And yet here she was, her voice cracked, shaking and sharp. "I instructed your kids." Her chest tightened each breath. "I've been in your libraries and schools. This is where I gave my all." The badges, however, did not wink. They failed to identify her. One of the men in the throng moved forward and waved the receipt he had grabbed from the wind. "She paid for her things," he exclaimed. "I observed it, myself." Anticipating a moment or reluctance, he handed it over, yet there was none. It was rejected by the officials. They didn't look at all. Power, once in motion, doesn't disrupt the fact's rhythm. Angela's blood started to trickle down her forehead, a scuff on the sidewalk. The infant kicked so forcefully that she gasped. Her body was bewildered by the searing ache that surged through her entire torso. It was told to suffer the brutality in silence. Her breath caught, Her lips quivered, and the only thing on her mind was keep the infant safe. Keep the infant safe. She spat out a name as they twisted her wrists behind her back. It is a cry of identity, not a weapon or a means of intimidation. Give my spouse a call, Morris. David, a pause. He is the FBI's director. There was no danger. It served as a lifeline. A request to be regarded as human. At last, a black automobile squealed close by. An older, ranking plane officer emerged. His eyes glanced about, then paused. He recognized her face. His mouth parted, but not they spoke. His cheeks lost their color. In a single sentence, the occurrence filtered. Not really, but out of concern about the repercussions, Lieutenant Harlan. The senior officer remained still. His gaze was focused on the blood on Angela's face, the tight plastic zip ties, and the bruises that were developing too rapidly on her exposed wrists. This was nothing new to him. Press coverage, litigation, and complaints, but never this near. Never involved a person whose name was on the verge of making the national news. The first time he heard FBI title director David Morris ring in his ears, as a ticking clock rather than a title, he moved forward a step and talked without glancing at Keene or Blake. Now uncuffer, silence fell for a beat. Blake paused, perplexed. We did as we were told, sir. She wasn't willing to cooperate, I said. Now, there was no room for argument in the tone. They cut the plastic ties. Although Angela's arms fell limp to her sides, she failed to stand. She paused to regain her breath on the pavement. There was no apology. Individuals in the vicinity of they held phones, but their silence weighed more than the scene they were filming. They had all witnessed it firsthand. Time. Every choice, every error, every needless bit of force. The abuse had not stopped after her husband's identity was revealed. It had just altered the way others viewed its price. Angela slowly sat up. She had ripped her hoodie. As the baby moved, her stomach jerked, responding to adrenaline as if it were an internal silent protest. Heron stooped to held out a hand. She refused to accept it. Would you be here if? She inquired quietly. Instead of looking him in the eye, he remained silent. I weren't married to him? Minutes later, a paramedic team showed up. They were kind, clearly shaken. One of them inquired as to whether she required a stretcher. Sheriffist, she declared. I can walk, despite her legs shaking, as they assisted. Someone in the throng moved forward to help her stand up. A college-aged young man who had been recording everything that happened when she left the store. He declared, I've got the whole thing. It's already online. She gave a nod. Lieutenant Harlan ordered a thorough internal review back at the station, saying, keep it up. In private, he made his chief. Legal counsel and a private line he set aside for political calls were the recipients of 3 phone calls. Crises. This was more unsettling to him than the cameras or the consequences for civil rights. What Angela had done, there was nothing incorrect, and everything had been recorded. He was unable to bury this. Nobody was able to. In the meanwhile, Angela sat in the rear of an ambulance with gauze-wrapped hands, and her phone was eventually given back to her, cracked and barrel useful. After gazing at it, she read the final unread message from David. Are you all right? You haven't contacted me. She typed with trembling fingers. Scarcely answered. I'm alive. By that evening, the video had gone viral. Outlets across the nation. News tickers displayed the headline, Black woman assaulted. The police. The husband is the director of the FBI. However, Angela didn't find the headline that was important. Hundreds of responses from other women, Black, Latina, impoverished, and immigrants said, this occurred to me as well. Nobody paid attention. After midnight, David reached the hospital. He failed to bring safety. He brought himself in no team. He entered her room and noticed the antiseptic beeping of machinery, the bandages, and the bruises. However, it was her eyes. He was gutted by that. Not anger, not suffering, but that intense, unfathomable fatigue. Thesert that results from repeatedly being put to the test of one's dignity. He grabbed forcefully, placed it in his hand, and for the first time that day she shook her shoulders and dropped her gaze. However, neither slept, because they both understood that justice would not be served. It was evidence. It involved public hearings, investigations, and political scheming, opinion, and, at the heart of it all, a subject neither could adequately address. Had she not been his spouse, would she be alive? The parking lot security cameras were removed. 4 angles, not just one, they wanted body cam footage. Witness cell phone footage posted on Facebook, TikTok, and even Reddit was gathered. One frame started to take shape. A woman who hadn't lied, run, or raised her voice. And however, she was treated as though she possessed a threat. The 2 officers were not charged by Angela. Straight, she formally sued the city, the police department, and its training section in a civil suit. The assertion was purposeful, precisely worded to run, maintain, and safeguard a law enforcement culture where unintentional prejudice causes predicted harm to defenseless civilians, particularities of color. Instead of naming specific people, she named a system. This wasn't a female demanding retribution. This woman was demanding to be acknowledged. Angela didn't appear on TV, Sharefist to participate in interviews. She declined invites from exposés, feature segments, and national discussion shows. Rather, she agreed to one invitation to attend the police budget hearings before the local legislative council. A chamber without any applause from the crowd. Only 2 microphones, 15 lawmakers, and the quiet that gravity alone can contain. She was dressed in gray. She had her hair tied back. No script, no makeup. She proceeded to the podium and set a picture in front of herself. It displayed 23 third students in a classroom. Some of them smiling and some of them preoccupied. They are children of color. Her words, "These are my students, and I'd like you to understand what occurs when someone tells them without using words that their complexion raises suspicions." She didn't mention herself up to minute 5. Instead of Marcus, who was 9. Years old and labeled, he was hostile as he tapped his foot too quickly. Suspended from Lily because she instructed a teacher to cease shouting. She was once asked in private by a parent, "What should I tell my son when he sees cops and flinches?" She then related the tale. She did not say it as a victim would. She stated it like a witness, narrator, or instructor. Without question, I was halted. I was spinned without opposition. Before anyone even asked me a question, I was assumed to be guilty. And I'm not just standing here because my child is still alive, but because my spouse is a federal official. Others don't have that opportunity, she said. Stopped. Then she met the council member's gaze straight. What are you going to do when is your youngster gasping for air while their receipt flies into the gutter, face down on the sidewalk? No coughing or shifting papers were present. Nobody was brave enough to check their phones. David stood in the rear of the room, not as the director, but as a man who was no longer able to use rank to defend his wife. His eyes were fatigued. Not from labor, but from self-control. Angela gave him a single glance and went on. "You have systems with manuals, officers with badges, but I also watch the training videos, so do you have judgmental people? Although I learn from them, training doesn't halt harm when bias is left unchecked." Her last statement was resounding. This wasn't a horrible day. Was a system operating precisely as intended. She then resigned. The purpose of the room was to destroy, not to clap. Angela's testimony didn't receive millions of likes or trend on social media, but it did something riskier. It was written. Every syllable was transcribed by the municipal clerk, whose calm, factual, measured voice was inscribed into the record. It was now legally archived, not as a protest, but as a step into public government, evidence in the background. The reaction started with avoidance rather than apology. In a brief response, a city official said, "We take allegations seriously and support a full review." However, Angela wanted openness and wasn't interested in their seriousness, so she took the next step. Through her using the Freedom of Information Act, Angela, a lawyer and former civil rights scholar, requested information, not emails for training programs. She insisted on seeing the precise training officers receive on preventing bias. Even she was taken aback by the outcomes, which included 2 PowerPoint presentations from 3 years ago. There were no tests. One was 36 minutes long, and the other was designated optional. No embedded scenarios with black female civilians, no follow-up, little about dealing with pregnant people. Angela took the files to the following sheet, placed them on the table during the council hearing, and stated, "This is what you call training. You're not preparing officers to steer clear of prejudice. You're getting them ready to protect it." The room changed. Once again. A council member leaned towards his microphone after giving a slow nod. "Will Reapin, the Curriculum Revamping Committee." David, who had yet to make a public statement, observed from the corridor on Angela's lawsuit, and he refused. His lack of response was not absence, rather it was punishment. Angela was in charge of this one, and he didn't want to be the headline. Was changing the way justice reacts when it involves redirection rather than anger. City solicitors made a settlement offer behind closed doors. High 6 digits, Angela read it gently, then slid it in. It contained a confidentiality agreement and no acknowledgement of wrongdoing. The room fell silent. "I need your oath to reform, not money." What would that even look like? The official said, "Without hesitation," she replied, "Annual bias evaluation is required, not only once. Co-develop training modules be instructors and community panels evaluate live scenario exercises." Not all. It wasn't a bargain. Policemen must be fired, but they must all receive extensive personal retraining, was a requirement. The city publicly pledged to examine the entire training within a week. Division under civilian supervision. Angela had overcome institutional denial, which most cases couldn't. Word got out, neighboring cities noticed, and policy groups asked Angela to testify. Her educational framework in implicit bias was modified and implemented in 3 school districts as a pilot program. Her dignity-based, evidence-first, forward-looking approach was cited by civil liberties organizations. Now that her lawsuit is still pending, it serves as a model for others seeking systemic accountability, no treasonable restitution. In the meantime, the officers in question continued to be on administrative leave, were not protected, but they were also not sacrificed, and Angela would not allow the city to exploit them as scapegoats. She informed a local journalist that this isn't just about what they did, but also about what they were instructed to do and what they didn't do. One prevented them from becoming. David would still ask her in private, "Are you certain you want to keep heading?" She would always respond in the same manner. "I want the next woman to be capable of walking to her car without practicing survival skills." One morning, she came back to her classroom with a new "What does it mean to be believed?" was the title of the assignment that was pinned to the board. Some of the children's responses were profound, while others were literal. One of them wrote, "Indicates that the first time people pay attention." The twist had never been about power. About establishing the indisputable truth so that the system could no longer act as though it didn't see it. Angela didn't leave as a hero, walked away exhausted, not defeated, but weathered. Change occurs in audits, not with cheers. Revised regulations, in retraining guides where her remarks were printed next to legal definitions. And her experience had shook not because she sought revenge, but rather because she sought vision. With a single sentence from the board, the internal review's last session came to an end. A systemic failure happened, cold, official, but for once truthful. Beneath that wording were more than 120 pages of conclusions, such as the suggestion that future misbehavior reviews be fully supervised by civilians, improved procedures for inmates who are pregnant, as well as revised accountability structures. Angela never went back to the building because she had discovered something more profound. Something making enemies or headlines was never the goal of justice in its purest form. Was about altering who is automatically protected. She left without Ash-held victory in her hands, but there was an unstoppable ripple behind her. 2 months later, Officer Keene resigned without issuing a statement or acknowledging any wrongdoing. However, Angela didn't require it. She wasn't seeking regret, but rather a world in which the future Angela wouldn't thus be recognized as safe. Officer Blake was transferred and subsequently enrolled in an extended retraining program. Angela remained silent under civilian supervision. A year later, David and Angela welcomed Naomi Grace, their daughter, into a more subdued space that was Full of Angela hugged her close and said something, no sirens, soft music, someone else might hear it. A prayer, a pledge, or simply breathing. At last, freedom because of fear. They remained in the same neighborhood, the same school, the same supermarket. Because fleeing doesn't lead to true transformation, resides in remaining and improving the situation. Angela's presence served as a reminder that justice isn't what occurs. Courtrooms, pavements, and city council chambers are all places where decency must be upheld, reinstated as law. David, too, underwent a transformation, advocating more internally, but speaking less in public, quietly changing FBI guidelines and advocating for the inclusion of bias research in federal campaigning, for community trust units and providing training. But it was Angela who gave him the worst reality that conscience must ultimately be the judge of quiet, even purposeful silence. When a reporter questioned her years later about whether she ever forgave the cops, she hesitated not out of resentment, but rather because of accuracy. She stated that forgiveness isn't the goal. Accountability is, she continued, but I hope they improved as men. Teach their own sons to pause and think before acting. The classroom wall mural remains intact. Her profile, not as a victim but as a voice, and beneath that, months later, Naomi's small handprint was put. Justice reimagined does not imply flawless results. Rather, it means when we no longer regard anticipated harm as unavoidable. Power is no longer determined not by rank or uniform, but rather by the guts to own up to mistakes, make amends, and rebuild more effectively. Angela changed the law's perspective, not the law itself. Millions of people started to see their own reflection in it, in addition to her suffering, and they didn't turn away for the first time.